Boston BioLife is pleased to announce our summer education series. This is a combination of our cutting-edge, state-of-the-art webinars coupled with our social media posts on peer-reviewed research that supports important basic topics from the world of functional, regenerative medicine, and translational medicine. Our webinars feature topics from our corporate partners, include information such as practice coaching, business resources, surgical imaging, and more. In addition to our webinars and peer-reviewed research articles, we are releasing new topics from our educational mini-series program. These are scientifically oriented clinical concepts focused on important topics in personalized precision health. This will be followed up by other topics including immunology, gut health, neurological concepts such as traumatic brain injury, testing, functional mitochondrial biology, MSK medical imaging, and orthobiologics. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Today we have the final segment of the study of the endovascular system with Glycocalyx, and we're very pleased to have with us the founder and CEO of Microvascular Solutions, Robert Long, and once again with us we have Hans Vink, PhD, the engineer and developer of the science behind the Glycocalyx system and really doing the body of work in far as research in studying of the Glycocalyx system. Today they're going to be talking about the endocalyx, a supplement that has been shown to help benefit patients in restoring their microvascular health. So gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today at Boston BioLife and showing us all the new innovations that you have at Microvascular Solutions.
Thank you, Joel. We appreciate the opportunity to continue this series on the microvascular system and the importance of the endothelial glycocalyx. So in today's final session, what we'd like to cover is specifically what do we do about endothelial glycocalyx when it breaks down, and we'll be going through what we've done with the products, how we got to where we're at, and we'll also show you the research and data that we've got regarding the product that we have called endocalyx. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hans for a few minutes, and he'll refresh what we're going to be talking about, and then he'll turn it over to me for information on endocalyx, and then we'll go into the science.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that introduction. And before we'll start talking about endocalyx as a therapeutic to repair damaged glycocalyx and restore the health of your microvascular system, I would like to summarize shortly what we've shown before in the two other webinars on the science of glycocalyx and on the Glycocheck device to measure in patients and healthy people how healthy their microvascular system is and how healthy their glycocalyx is. As discussed before, if we look at the vascular system, most people know that the large arteries take the blood to the tissues and the organs, and then the large veins take the blood back to the heart. If you zoom in with a big microscope, you'll see that most of your vascular system, to 99%, is actually the smallest blood vessels where the red cells have to flow through one by one, called the microscopic capillaries. And then if we zoom in with a big microscope on an individual capillary, you realize that red cells are flowing through one by one, but they never touch the surface of the vessel wall. And there's a big gap between the compartment in the center where the red cells are flowing and the luminal surface of the endothelium. We now know that in this big gap between the red cells and the vessel wall, it's not just flowing fluid, but it's this transparent protective gel matrix called the glycocalyx that turns out to be essential to keep your microvascular system healthy and modulates all of the known functions of the endothelium. So now when we zoom in even further into this space with an electron microscope, you get images like these. Again, this is a cross-section of one of these capillary blood vessels in myocardial tissues. On the right-hand side, it's a larger magnification. So on top would be where the red cells are flowing. Here below is the endothelial lining on the inside of the blood vessel wall. And on the surface of the endothelial cells, you see these extensive three-dimensional polysaccharide matrix, which makes up the core of the endothelial glycocalyx. So these polysaccharides, they extend up to a micron or more into the lumen of microvessels, occupying a lot of volume. Now in the capillaries, they occupy up to 2/3 of the volume of these capillaries, and thereby are crucial to controlling blood content and the way red cells and other cells like platelets and leukocytes interact with the endothelium. Now these polysaccharides, predominantly heparan sulfate polysaccharides and hyaluronic acid, they bind a lot of the plasma proteins, and the proteins suck in a lot of the fluid into the matrix, forming a very stable gel-like matrix that prevents direct contact between the circulating blood and the luminal surface of the endothelium. Now, over the years, we and many others have studied the functional implications of this glycocalyx for endothelial function, and we've learned that these structures, the polysaccharides of the endothelial glycocalyx, are crucial to tell the endothelium to start producing nitric oxide when blood flow increases to minimize the shear forces acting on the vessel wall. Also, we realized that binding of important enzymes like superoxide dismutase to the polysaccharides of glycocalyx is essential to capture the oxygen radicals that are locally produced to prevent that these oxygen radicals will do damage to your blood vessels. Also, we realized that the tight nature of the polysaccharides in that matrix prevents leakage of fluids and proteins and larger molecules like cholesterol from the blood compartment into the vessel wall and leaving the vascular system. Also, the size of the glycocalyx, up to a few microns, not only prevents red cells to touch the endothelium, but also prevents other circulating cells like platelets and leukocytes to stick to the small adhesion molecules, which are only nanometers long and produced on the membrane of the endothelium. So a healthy glycocalyx prevents adhesion and sticking of the platelets and also prevents the activation of the local inflammatory response by preventing circulating leukocytes to stick to the endothelial adhesion molecules. After we discussed the science, I also discussed in the previous presentation the use of the Glycocheck device. So with the Glycocheck device, we can measure life by monitoring how red cells are flowing through the microvasculature in the sublingual capillaries, how healthy your microvascular system is, and how it changes when people are exposed to different risk factors like obesity. So this slide showed the impact of obesity on microvascular health by counting the number of the smallest capillaries in people at low risk or at medium risk or high risk for future cardiovascular disease. So these are still healthy individuals, but by adding up all the risk factors like age, body size, and smoking, etc., you can see that people at high risk already lose about 50% of the number of their smallest capillaries as compared to more healthy, low-risk individuals. Furthermore, we showed that in more critical situations, like in patients with COVID-19 or patients with sepsis in the ICU, they will lose even more capillaries, up to 95% of their smallest capillaries because of glycocalyx damage. And we believe that this significant loss of capillaries significantly contributes to the problems at an organ level in these patients. So when you lose 95% of your capillaries because of a damaged glycocalyx, you can imagine that there will be a lot of damage to organs like your kidney, your brain, your lungs, your heart. Understanding the impact of this damaged microvascular system and damage to glycocalyx turns out to be crucial to understand what's happening to these patients and makes it really clear that we need to think about therapeutic options, how to help these individuals repair their glycocalyx and the microvascular system. So furthermore, in addition to just counting the number of capillaries, by combining it to measuring the level of glycocalyx damage with the Glycocheck device, we were able to develop what's called a microvascular health score. So this slide just shows you a normal range of microvascular health scores in healthy controls ranging between 4 and 8. It also shows in individuals with a compromised microvascular health or even further damage to their microvascular health is correlating with the number of organs that will be failing. These are data shown in a recent publication on sepsis patients. So sepsis patients with a damaged microvascular system, the more level of glycocalyx damage and more level of microvascular damage, see correlates with more and more organs failing in these individual patients. Now, after discussing the importance of glycocalyx to microvascular health and showing that with the Glycocheck device we can monitor an individual's microvascular health and how their glycocalyx is doing, it becomes apparent that we need to develop something, a therapeutic to target improving the health of your microvascular system. And I was very lucky to meet with Bob Long. It was almost 10 years ago after I developed the Glycocheck device and we started measuring different levels of microvascular health and glycocalyx damage in individuals. So the first question that always came up is, okay, I have a compromised microvascular system and my glycocalyx might be damaged. So what can I do about it? And I didn't know what to tell them. And then Bob showed up in 2012 and we started working what's now known as endocalyx. So it is a specific therapeutic design to improve the health of your glycocalyx and microvascular health. So with that, I'll give the word back to Bob Long and he can tell a little bit more how it came about and what's so important about endocalyx.
Well, thank you, Hans. I appreciate that overview and introduction. I think it might be helpful to share a little more background about how you and I came to meet. It all began for me with a personal health scare that I had in 2009 and 10. And I went to a cardiologist, and he thought I had a blockage. He didn't do any image or anything. I'd gone for my annual physical, and I told my physician I had a tightness in my chest when I walked up in the mountains behind my house in Utah. And he sent me to see a cardiologist that day. And actually where they sent me was at the Regional Medical Center. They talked to me, and they said, well, we think you've probably got a blockage in one of your arteries. So what we'd like to do is an angioplasty procedure, and we'll go with a little camera. And if you've got a blockage, then we'll put a stent in, and that will solve the problem. I hadn't had a heart attack. I just knew I had a tightness in my chest. So they did that procedure, and then after it was over, it wasn't an emergency procedure, so I was the last one to get it done at the hospital that day. The physician came back and said, I've got good news and I've got bad news. And said, well, give me the good news. And the good news was that I didn't have any blockages, so they didn't need to put a stent in. And the bad news was they didn't really know why I had that tightness in my chest. So as I said, that was in about 2009. And so my radar was up really high because in my mind, I wondered what was happening to me. And I also thought, I wonder how many thousands of people does this happen to in the world? And there's really nothing that is currently being done. So we had just sold a company at that time, so I had time and money on my hands. And because my radar was up high, I was introduced by a friend. He and his brother had created a product called Microvascular that ultimately fell in the market, didn't succeed, but they told me about the concept of the endothelial glycocalyx. And when I heard of that concept, that was, I guess, a lightning bolt moment for me, in that I thought that might be what's wrong with me. So I shifted all my energy and time to becoming an expert on the endothelial glycocalyx, and in the course of doing that, I kept coming across all the papers published by one individual in the Netherlands, Dr. Hans Vink, and I came to understand that he was a leading pioneer in that research, and I read all of his papers. I became enchanted with the thought of what if we could create a product that could restore that endothelial glycocalyx when it breaks down. And so that's what we set out to do. I hired a biochemist and a team, and we started developing a product, and I'll explain more of that in a few minutes. But I went over and I met with Hans because I was following all of his work, and I knew that he had developed the Glycocheck system. That was in early 2012, as Hans mentioned. And I thought, well, the only way I could find out if I'm on the right track with the product I'm developing is if I could get measured with this Glycocheck, because based on what it's supposed to do, it could tell me if what I'm working on is making a thicker glycocalyx. And so that's what I did, and that's how Hans and I originally met. So with that, I want to start out by showing you a quick 3-minute video that'll give you an overview of the product that we've developed and how it works and what it targets specifically.
Years of research have exposed an understanding of the function and structure of the protective gel lining in your circulatory or vascular system called the glycocalyx. A new proprietary patented nutraceutical named Endocalyx is specifically formulated to deliver the building blocks essential to maintain a healthy glycocalyx and microvascular system. The ingredients are sourced from regions around the world where people are known to live longer and healthy, active lives. Endocalyx is made from concentrated extracts of 7 natural ingredients. These ingredients contain the same compounds that make up and protect the structure of the glycocalyx. It's a specific blend right down to the molecular structure that makes all the difference in the result of taking Endocalyx daily. This patented combination of ingredients in specific dosage amounts stimulates 3 actions that restore, regenerate, and protect the glycocalyx and microvascular system. The first result of this specific blend comes from polysaccharides that restore the protective structure of the glycocalyx. The second result comes from the amino sugars that regenerate the body's ability to produce more of the glycocalyx protective gel. And the third result comes from the antioxidants that work to protect the glycocalyx from breaking down. Scientific research backs up that these synergistic ingredients, when combined together, deliver these vital results in your microvascular system. Universities and hospitals around the world are conducting research projects right now, and the list of research papers written by medical professionals continues to grow. Importantly, a growing list of researchers now understand the paradigm-shifting advantages of combining these ingredients. As endocalyx strengthens the glycocalyx, it helps optimize the structure of the capillaries. From head to toe, optimal capillary function delivers many benefits. The better each brain cell is supplied with oxygen and nutrients, the better your mood, the clearer your mind, the more productive your thinking. Healthy skin, hair, and eyes depend on a steady supply of oxygen and nutrients in order to renew, grow, and stay healthy. Skin color and tone are enhanced. Your hair and nails are stronger and healthier. And your eyes are clearer and brighter. As endocalyx strengthens the glycocalyx, the blood in your entire vascular system is better able to reach and energize each cell of your body. Then all the cells of your body, including your brain, heart, and muscles, are amply supplied with oxygen and nutrients. This means that more blood cells carrying more nutrients and vital oxygen to all of your muscle, skin, and nerve cells restore warmth, feeling, and comfort. Don't wait another minute. Wake up and listen to your body's early warning signs that your glycocalyx and microvascular system is breaking down. Take control of tomorrow now by starting daily use of endocalyx today. It's not too late to restore, regenerate, and protect your glycocalyx and microvascular system.
Okay, the next thing I'd like to cover is a little background on how endocalyx came to be. So the first product that I was working on that I mentioned in 2012 was a product that was called Arterial. It's actually still in the market today and is sold by a company called Calroy Sciences. We sold that formula and inventory to them in 2013 when Dr. Vink and I began working together heavily and formed Microvascular Health Solutions, because by then, based on the work that Dr. Vink and I had done, we knew we could develop a much better product. So we get a lot of questions about what's the difference between arterial and endocalyx. So I thought I'd just take a few minutes and talk about both products, since I developed both products, and explain what the differences are. So as I mentioned, based on that health scare that I had, when I first got involved, I thought that the problem was an artery problem. And so Hans already showed this schematic 1%, the large arteries and veins. And so I thought it was an artery problem. So when I was developing the product, my focus was to seal the arteries and fix the damage that was being done that caused the leakage of cholesterol and led arterial plaque development. So thus the name artery seal came up with the name Arterial. That's how the name came to be. And then after I started working with Dr. Vink and really came to understand the real purpose of the endothelial glycocalyx and everything that it controls in the body, I also came to learn, and as we worked together, the importance of the microscopic capillaries. As Hans has mentioned, and as you saw in the video, all of the nutrients, the oxygen, everything is delivered to every cell in the body through the microscopic capillaries. And that's also how the carbon dioxide and waste is removed. So what we decided we needed to focus on was not just the 1%, the large arteries, but we were focused on creating a product that was really focused on 100% of the system, not just the large arteries, but the microscopic capillaries. And so that's what led us to develop endocalyx. So endocalyx is a substantially larger dose. It's 4 double-lot-sized capsules because it has more ingredients in it compared to Arterial that we delivered. You can see the difference in the dose, and you can see the price points, the retail price of both products. The ingredient comparisons, when I developed Arterial, we were already aware of a green seaweed that had been studied called Monostroma nitidum, and we actually created an extraction process to concentrate that seaweed. It was a hot water extraction process, and we ended up with about a 32% concentrated compound, and we believe that it contains some levels of a compound called ramman sulfate. We didn't know, and to this day, I don't believe it's known the exact amounts of the percentage of ramman sulfate, but we do believe that when you do that concentrated extract, you do end up with some ramman sulfate. And ramman sulfate had been shown to affect the endothelial glycocalyx, and I was able to validate that with Hans when I first met him with that seaweed. And then the other thing that we put in that product, at the time we developed that product, in 2012, the Mediterranean diet was very popular. The thought process was that if you look at life expectancies, as you saw in the video that I showed, people live longer in certain parts of the world, and so we thought it's probably linked to their diet. So a company I work with in France had just developed a product that was an extract of 27 fruits and vegetables. So we put that in the formula with the idea that it would provide the antioxidants into the diet as a nutritional supplement that perhaps would provide some antioxidant ingredients. And so that's what arterial was. And then after I started working with Dr. Vink, I was also interested in another type of kelp or brown seaweed that had, we believe, even better properties potentially to associate and bind to the endothelial glycocalyx. So we shifted our focus in research to a specific type of seaweed, and we have an extract that we use in endocalyx. It's an 85% extract, and we got that certified, and every time we produce the products, it's at least a minimum of an 85% extract of specifically fucoidin sulfate. And so it's validated as a hybrid heparin sulfate, and it also has some properties of chondroitin sulfate, and it has a high binding affinity for heparinase, and so it actually binds and restores immediately, and Hans will show you some of the research we've done on restoring the endothelial glycocalyx with this particular compound. We also knew that hyaluronic acid and hyaluronan were important compounds with regard to the structural stability and dimension of the endothelial glycocalyx. So we also add a high molecular weight hyaluronan to the product. The other thing that we do is after the first run with arterial, the company I work with had done multiple double-blind studies on specifically 3 extracts: olive, artichoke, and red and white grape extract. They showed high antioxidant and restorative capabilities for inflammation and had flavonoids. And then, as Hans has taught you, the body produces its own antioxidants. One of those is superoxide dismutase. So we found a natural source of superoxide dismutase. It comes from a bitter melon concentrate, and it associates immediately with that gel matrix that we've talked about that's part of the endothelial glycocalyx. So we've been able to validate that these antioxidant ingredients survive the oral intake, and they actually arrive in the vascular compartment at clinically effective doses. Then the last thing that we added, and this was Hans's idea, and he had already done quite a bit of research with his research groups on glucosamine sulfate, and they knew that glucosamine sulfate was an important substrate that helped with the biosynthesis to create more of that gel matrix. And so I started doing a lot of research and looked at glucosamine. It had been used a lot retrospectively. I read a lot of papers that had been done with glucosamine for joint health. And what we found is there were some unintended good benefits that all of those people in those joint studies had. And it was that they had better lung function, they had better heart function, and more importantly, they actually lived longer than the controls that didn't take the glucosamine. So 10 years ago, we knew the reason for that was due to the glucosamine in their diet. So we included the same amount of glucosamine, 1,500 milligrams that was used in those studies. And we use a vegetarian source that's patented extract method, use a vegetarian source. And so the entire formula for endocalyx is completely plant-based. And we wanted to make sure that we had a formula that anybody in the world could take, and regardless of their religious or dietary constraints. So after we developed the product, we filed a patent. So back to Arterial, when we first developed that product, I filed a patent with the company that we had at that time on Arterial. That was filed in January of 2013. When I realized that we were going to shift and no longer work on that product, I didn't pursue that patent any further, and so that provisional patent died. And so there has not been a patent pending specifically on the Arterial formula since 2014. So in 2015, Dr. Vink and I filed a patent on the Endocalyx formula, and it's based on the 3 types of compounds and the synergistic function of those compounds. And that patent was issued on April 17, 2018. It's since been in the United States. It's since been issued in Japan and South Korea, and we currently have patents pending about to issue in all of the European countries, Canada, and also China. And so basically the patent that was issued is a method of treatment patent, specifically on the synergistic compounds that treat the endothelial glycocalyx that we've talked about. And we talked a little bit more detail about what each of the compounds do in the video that I showed a few minutes ago. Next thing that we did is we started into very robust studies and papers and research. And so we were interested in specific studies. As Hans mentioned, before he met me, he had a method and had spent 25 years or so, 22 years or so at that time investigating the glycocalyx, and he'd always get questions about, so what do we do to fix it? And he didn't really have an answer until we started working together. And so with Arterial, we did one study together, and that was on that Arterial formula. And Hans did an animal study. It was a cultured cell study, and we also looked to see if the formula would restore the glycocalyx, and we found that it did. So we knew we were on the right track. And so that's the only study that's ever been done with regard to actual proof that Arterial had some impact on the endothelial glycocalyx specifically. So when it comes to endocalyx, today what we're going to do is Hans is going to go through all of the studies that we have in place and cover those with you. And we have a lot of studies, and what we choose to do is we choose to not just publish white papers, but we work with third parties, and we strive diligently to get those published in peer-reviewed third-party journals. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Hans.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, for introducing endocalyx, how it came about, and what we hope to do with the endocalyx. What I would like to do is to illustrate our findings in the different studies that we're doing with the endocalyx. So most of them are ongoing, some of them are completed and still in peer review, and then some of them just started. So I'll show some data of most of these studies. So there will be studies using endocalyx on cultured endothelial cells to test whether adding endocalyx to the supernatant, helping the endothelial cells to protect themselves better against challenges. Also will be studies on animals, specifically mouse studies, mice eating endocalyx for 2 or 3 months to see if it helps them protect against different challenges and diseases, and also going to show you some data on the human studies that we've done and are still ongoing. So with the cultured cells, we are doing currently studies on the effect of endocalyx to see if protecting the endothelium against breakdown of glycocalyx when exposed to the enzyme heparinase. Bob already mentioned this enzyme, and heparinase is an enzyme in disease, is upregulated in high concentrations. We think it's for a great part responsible of the damage that people get in disease to their glycocalyx. Also going to show you some data on cultured cells, how endocalyx can protect against damage of the microvascular system in kidney disease. So we took blood samples from patients with kidney disease, used those blood samples to expose the endothelial cells in culture and see if we can actually induce damage or prevent damage with the endocalyx. Also currently, and that's still ongoing, is a study on COVID-19. So we do the same thing. We take blood samples from different patient groups, also patients in the ICU with COVID-19, and we are seeing that the highly toxic plasma from those patients damages the endothelium and the glycocalyx, and that can be prevented, that damage, and restored with endocalyx. I'm going to show you some study on animal studies where we can see that the endocalyx protects against inflammation. Also in a diabetic mouse model that endocalyx can prevent the kidney problems associated with diabetes. And a completed study on aging, again in mice, showing that endocalyx can reverse the aging effects, thereby reducing the level of inflammation, improving the level of nitric oxide production, and also normalizing blood pressures. I'm also going to show you some data on our human studies. We did studies on healthy volunteers, showing that in a few months you can improve the health of your microvasculature and glycocalyx significantly at taking endocalyx. Similarly, for a study on different supplements, showing that there's significant improvement. Your microvascular health score is assessed with the glycocalyx system when you start taking endocalyx. Also, we recently completed a clinical trial, early stage kidney disease in a very vulnerable subgroup of people, showing that endocalyx can significantly improve microvascular health and glycocalyx. Some data on wound healing and also some early findings on blood pressure control in humans. So with that, I'll start showing some of those data. So shortly after Bob and I met in 2012, the first thing we started testing is for the different seaweeds when we were targeting really the microvasculature, what would be optimal. And so the seaweed we are using in endocalyx was tested in early pilot studies in humans. And using the Glycocheck device to measure the level of glycocalyx damage, we could clearly see that the formula in endocalyx is very effective. Already in a few weeks, we could see that the level of glycocalyx damage could be reduced significantly in these early pilot studies. Furthermore, as shown already in my earlier webinar on the science of glycocalyx, we used a tool for in vivo studies in mice to monitor the level of leukocyte adhesion to the vascular wall as a measure for inflammation. So again, this is shown here. This is a microscopic image of a small venule. On the left-hand side, the small venule is impaled by a small glass micropipette, and every few seconds we can inject either just a saline solution or a solution with enzymes that breaks down your glycocalyx and causes inflammation, causing these inflammatory cells to stop rolling and stick to the endothelium as a sign of local inflammation. So what we did, we exposed the vessel wall to enzymes like hyaluronidase, shown in red, that measured the effect of glycocalyx breakdown on the development of the inflammatory response. And this slide shows you that compared to the baseline level of leukocyte adhesion, as soon as glycocalyx is damaged by the hyaluronidase enzyme, within minutes, you see there is a 2- or 3-fold increase in the level of sticking leukocytes to the endothelium. So a very acute and very significant increase in the level of inflammation as soon as glycocalyx is damaged. In contrast, if the animals were given endocalyx before the inflammatory challenge to damage glycocalyx was immediately repaired again by the endocalyx, and you see that the endocalyx is completely able to prevent the increase in level of inflammation in this acute animal model. Again, as Bob already mentioned, in addition to the restoration of glycocalyx by the seaweed inside the endocalyx, we also realized that because of the similarities in the structure of the seaweed and endocalyx compared with the heparan sulfate polysaccharides of glycocalyx, there's also a very high binding affinity of the fucoidin seaweed to an enzyme called heparinase. And that, again, is the enzyme responsible for glycocalyx damage. But this curve on the left just shows you that higher concentrations of fucoidin can completely inhibit the heparinase activity. And our current measurements of the plasma levels of fucoidin show that taking endocalyx will give you plasma levels of fucoidin that are about 50 times higher than the dose shown in this in vitro study necessary to block the heparinase activity. That's also confirmed on the right-hand side, where we show blood samples from patients. Patients not taking endocalyx show a reference level of heparinase activity, and then by taking endocalyx, we can completely inhibit the activity of the heparinase enzyme and thereby preventing more damage to their glycocalyx. Some data on cultured endothelial cell studies in which we measured the dimension of glycocalyx with a atomic force microscope device. So with that, you can actually measure the dimension of glycocalyx on these cultured cells. This slide shows you that you have a reference level of glycocalyx to start with. If you add that enzyme heparinase, it can significantly damage your glycocalyx and resulting in a much smaller glycocalyx, a much more vulnerable microvascular system. And if you add endocalyx to the endothelial cells, you can see that you can completely protect the endothelium and prevent the damage by the heparinase enzyme. Well, similarly, if you take those cultured endothelial cells and you take blood samples from kidney patients, we'll find that in the plasma of the kidney patients, there are a lot of toxic stimuli that break down your glycocalyx on your endothelium. But if you pre-treat the endothelium with endocalyx, then even exposing it to the highly toxic plasma from the kidney patients doesn't damage your glycocalyx anymore, and endocalyx really supports the health of your endothelium and protects your glycocalyx against the damage by these toxic stimuli from the kidney patient's plasma. Well, in the same line, we looked at kidney damage in a diabetic mouse model. So from top to bottom, the first row are control images from healthy mice. And in the middle column, it shows you the staining for glycocalyx in the microvessels in the kidney. So the green dye reflects a healthy glycocalyx in microvessels in the kidney. Now the middle row shows data from diabetic mice without any therapeutic offered. So in diabetic mice over time, we see, especially in the kidney, a lot of loss of glycocalyx and a lot of damage to the microvasculature, finally ending up in kidney failure in these diabetic mice. By contrast, if we give endocalyx to these diabetic mice and we have them take the endocalyx for up to 2 months, up to 3 months, you see that in the same animal model with endocalyx, it can completely prevent the diabetes-induced kidney damage. So they have a normal level of glycocalyx staining and normal healthy microvasculature preserving kidney function in this mouse model due to the use of endocalyx. Again, in the same line of protecting glycocalyx and microcirculation in kidney patients, we did a clinical trial that we recently completed on the effect of endocalyx preventing microvascular damage in kidney patients. This is an example of the effect of endocalyx in kidney patients. So this is a before and after image of microvascular perfusion in the sublingual tissue. On the left-hand side was before this individual started taking endocalyx, and you can appreciate there's only very few capillaries perfused and blood flow is very slow and sluggish, ending up in a very low overall microvascular health score. On the right-hand side, the same individual, after taking the endocalyx for about 4 months, there's a significant increase in the number of capillaries, much more improved blood flow and restored glycocalyx health, ending up in a significant improvement of their microvascular health score from 0.6 up to 3.9. Also, in this individual, we did monitor the development of the microvascular health score over time. So this individual started out with a poor score. Remember, the score ranges between 0 and 10. So a 1 is a very poor score for microvascular health. But when this individual started taking endocalyx for the first time, the score started increasing to 1.5, so what, a 50% increase after 3 to 4 months. Unfortunately, this individual ran out of endocalyx product, stopped taking it for a few months, and the score dropped down again to low scores. Then the second time, this individual started taking endocalyx again within about 3 months, there was a further significant increase of his microvascular score from 2.5 up to 3 after the second time of use of endocalyx. And similarly, we did follow the kidney function in this individual. And in parallel with the improvements of microvascular health, the individual started out with a very poor kidney function. So the so-called glomerular filtration rate tells you how much urine is being produced by the kidney. Typical value should be up in the 70 or 80 mils per minute for this individual of this age. A low score of 30 mils per minute is getting close to a critical stage of kidney failure. And after taking endocalyx, we saw an initial improvement of his kidney function after 3 or 4 months in line with the improved microvascular health. Again, the score dropped down during the absence of taking endocalyx. And again, after retaking endocalyx, the kidney function further improved to normal values, close to 70, 80 mils per minute in this individual. Well, another example of the impact of endocalyx is an observation that we did on wound healing. This is an individual that came to us with a very poor recovery from an open wound in the lower limb. The wound didn't close. There was hardly any blood perfusion in the wound area. As you can tell, it was very pale. The surrounding tissue started turning very dark and black, and there was a high risk of lower limb amputation in this individual. At the same time, the individual was suffering from a chronic level of hypertension and blood pressures of 200 over 110. It was not responsive treatment by conventional antihypertensive drugs. And as soon as this individual started taking endocalyx, already after a few weeks, we saw a change in the color inside the wound area. So there was a clear increase in the level of microvascular blood flow in the wound area. And after 3 to 4 months, we saw that the wound started closing and actually completely healed and still taking endocalyx. Even as important, even more important, we also realized in this individual, and we've seen it now many times, that also the apparently uncontrollable levels of hypertension quickly normalized after taking endocalyx only for a few weeks. So blood pressure dropped from 200 over 110 to as low as 126 over 70 and stayed stable in a normal range while taking endocalyx. Well, we did similar studies in a mouse model of aging, and in this mouse model of taking endocalyx for 8 weeks in older mice clearly showed that you compare the microvascular health in young mice with older mice, it drops down by losing a lot of capillaries and damage to your glycocalyx. Already after 8 weeks of taking endocalyx, there's a significant increase again in microvascular health. Similarly, in this same mouse model, we also measured the level of nitric oxide production by their larger vessels. And again, the drop in nitric oxide production with aging was almost completely reversed by taking endocalyx for 8 weeks in the older mice. Also, if we look at the level of inflammation by measuring the accumulation of macrophages in the gut, there's a significant increase in inflammation with aging, which is again normalized by taking endocalyx. And also, if we measure the blood pressures in the older mice, we find a significant normalization of blood pressure in the older mice taking endocalyx. Well, currently we are doing a study also on humans measuring blood pressure effects of endocalyx. So consistent with the findings in the aging mice, we see that people with hypertension, so a systolic blood pressure of approximately between 160 and 170 millimeters mercury, show a significant drop in the systolic blood pressure back into the normal range of about 125. Also, their diastolic blood pressures dropped from over 100 to close to 80 millimeters of mercury. And to finalize human studies that we did in healthy controls taking supplements. So again, if we look at the microvascular health score as measured by the Glycocheck device on the left as a reference are the very low scores that we find in critically ill patients in the ICU, 1-ish or less than 2. Then again, next to that are the normal ranges of microvascular health that we find in individuals that are not taking any supplements. So they typically score in the 3 to 4 range. Then on the right-hand side, you see people start taking endocalyx on top of whatever else they are trying to do to improve their microvascular health. We can about to double your microvascular health from the 3 to 4 range into the 7-ish range, just taking endocalyx for about 3 months. And to finalize, to show you how we can actually monitor with the Glycocheck device what happens. So if we measure the same individuals before taking endocalyx, you can see significant increases in their microvascular health, taking endocalyx for a few months. And again, confirmed by this proof of concept study that we did in the early days, people taking endocalyx, just a regular cross-section of healthy individuals, showing that in the course of 3 to 4 months of taking endocalyx, your microvascular health and your capillary density increases about 50%. And at the same time, the level of glycocalyx damage significantly decreases by taking endocalyx. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and give the word back to Bob Long for some final closing words.
So thank you, Hans, for sharing that information and the science that we've been working on. As you mentioned, we have many studies ongoing right now across a wide range of health conditions, both with the Glycocheck device and with the endocalyx nutritional supplement. So we appreciate all of you taking your time to watch this series of presentations on the endothelial glycocalyx and its important role in health and controlling disease progression in our bodies. And we look forward to further discussions with you in the future. Thank you very much, Joe, letting us sponsor this event. And
gentlemen, thank you very much for that informative presentation. I think it's amazing that you've come up with the level of detail, and over the last 3 presentations, including this one, we've learned not only what the glycocalyx is, how we can image it, how we can determine its integrity and its physiological characteristics, and now also how we can enhance and help create a healthier microvascular system for our patients. I really applaud the work that you've done and really appreciate you being a sponsor with Boston BioLife and providing this resource to our healthcare providers, because as we've said many times, all health and wellness starts with the vascular system, and the very detailed and scientific details that are part of understanding this system are very important for both patients and healthcare providers alike. So gentlemen, thank you very much for supporting Boston BioLife, and congratulations on all the hard work you've done with microvascular solutions.